Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Endurance Physios podcast. I'm Dr. Will Gonzaba, joined as always by Dr. Sam Rockwater. How's it going, Sam?
Howdy, Will. I'm doing well. How are you today?
Yeah, man, good, doing great, man. It's always fun to record another podcast. So, originally, man, we had planned to talk and do a race recap of the Whiskey 50 that had planned to do this past weekend. Unfortunately, man, some injuries came up, and that weren't able to execute that. But we thought that we'd still hop on and kind of talk about what happened and use this as an opportunity to talk about when should you pull the plug on a race? Because I think almost all of us have been there and have thought like, hey man, like, should I be doing this? Whether that's because of an injury or stress or whatever's going on in your life. So we wanted to dive into that with everyone today. But I think before we get into that, man, Sam, tell us what went down, man. So this race was supposed to happen this last Saturday. Kind of talk us through the timeline of what led to you pulling the plug on the event.
First of all, Whiskey 50 is a 50-mile mountain bike race up in Prescott, Arizona. Absolutely love that race. I've done it before. Was really looking forward to it again. And essentially, I went and tuned up my bike, put some new brakes on. So I went from 2-piston to 4-piston brakes, so a little bit more braking power, which was awesome. So upgrade those brakes, went out for a test ride the Monday before the race, on a trail that I've been to previously. It's my local trail. It's the one that's, I ride to the trailhead. It's 15-minute ride to the trailhead. And then you go on the trail and go up from there. And, went up and down on the backside, did a little loop, came up on the way back, and then was descending down kind of the last little, I guess, section, if you will. And I overcooked the corner. And when I overcooked the corner, because it's a pretty steep mountain on one side, so it's almost like a little bench cut. So for those of you that don't know, it's almost like cut into like an L, so it creates like a little flat spot where you can actually have a trail. And so I went around the corner and just took it a little bit too hot, and my tire kind of bounced to the outside or the downward slope, towards the downward slope. And essentially what happened is the front tire got into some really soft dirt because it was starting to slide down the hill. And when that happened, the wheel turns, and essentially I kind of ducked and rolled to try and avoid as much injury as possible. And I landed on my right side. My knee smoked the ground, and then my elbow smoked kind of the outside of my elbow, almost like right where all the extensors, for those of you that have BTs, the extensors or the muscles up on the top of your forearm. I hit those, and that smashed right into a rock. So that didn't feel the most wonderful. I'm okay. I'm totally fine. I was able to bike home. I think my ego was more bruised than myself initially. And so anyways, that was on Monday. Knee got a little stiff and tight. And so then on Tuesday, I went out for just like a super easy ride around the block, just half hour, just to try and loosen it up, because the knee was pretty stiff in the morning, elbow not so much. Anyways, ended up loosening up the knee felt fine afterwards. Repeated that the next day as well. So on Wednesday, knee was less stiff in the morning, elbow felt fine again. And then on Thursday, I started to feel the elbow a heck of a lot more. My knee pretty much warmed up totally fine. No real issues, just had a little scrape on there, a little road rash or dirt rash, whatever you want to call it. And the elbow started really bothering me. And where that is on the elbow, because if you bend your wrist back, all those muscles contract up on the top portion of your forearm there. And so they're also responsible for grip and grip strength. And so essentially I started having issues with gripping things, and even something as simple as holding a pen or holding my cell phone started to become a little bit more painful. Tried to ice it, tried to give it all sorts of physical therapy and modalities and everything that I could. Friday, continued to hurt, and I made the decision to not race on Saturday, which I was a little bit bummed about, but mainly due to grip strength and not wanting to hurt it further. But yeah, so essentially that's my long-winded answer as to why I didn't race the Whiskey 50. I'm definitely bummed I didn't, because it's always a party up there. It's always a good time. The race is a lot of fun. Oftentimes it's beautiful weather. It's like perfect time up there because it's 60-ish, 60 to 70-ish degrees, which is absolutely perfect for racing up there. It is at a little bit of elevation, but nothing crazy. It's super fun. So yeah, kind of bummed, definitely bummed that I wasn't able to race. But now here, the early next week, I feel a lot better. I'm able to now like get back to my strength training program, get back on the bike, and like feel super comfortable with that. So ultimately, it was the proper and right decision, probably long term for me. Could have I have potentially done the race? Yes. I would still probably be in the hurt bag, not from my legs, but more from my upper body. But yeah, essentially, I wanted to. That's the
Yeah,
reason
and
why I didn't race. But yeah, it's a bummer.
I mean, it was the right decision, man. It's totally a bummer, but I think like just given like where the injury was, with it being in your forearm and it being a technical mountain bike race, you just said that it's got a pretty big descent. Parts of it are pretty sketchy, and I think you look at these like endurance mountain bike races that are over 2 hours, like your forearms are cooked whether they hurt or not, like whether there's an injury or not. So I
Yeah.
don't know, man. I think that would have been like not a fun experience after maybe like an hour or two of doing it. And, you probably would have risked it just being a lingering thing for the next couple weeks. So it makes plenty of sense, man.
I think the
Still a bummer. Still
you
a
know
bummer though.
yeah, still a bummer, of course. There is next year, and I will probably plan on racing it
Mhm.
again next year. But to turn a negative thing into a positive thing, I think it's and we were talking about this super briefly when we were talking. Okay, well, like there is no race recap because I didn't race. But what if we talk about when to pull the plug on racing? And I think to turn something negative into something positive and something where we all hopefully can learn about it a little bit more, or at least think about it next time if we happen to have an injury or something like that. And so we kind of, I think the best way to go about it is down into like two different major categories, or two different categories. One is like a major injury, and one is a minor injury. And I think well, let's start with the major injury. Major injury,
Mhm.
oftentimes the decision is a little bit more apparent, right? You broke a bone and now you can't race, clearly, right? Or there's other things that happen. Okay, you can't walk. How are you going to run a marathon? It's probably not going to happen, right? You have this insane Achilles tendinitis, and now all of a sudden you can't even walk. That's a major injury. I think the biggest thing to look at is when it's a major injury is if it's a safety concern, right? And
Mhm.
and like, I don't want to call my bike crash a major injury by any means, but there was definitely some safety concern within there. About like gripping and being able to, and it was my right hand too, so it would have been my rear brake. And so being able to grab onto the brakes when I need to and not have to think twice about it. Um, but I think safety concern is like first and foremost, definitely something that you should be thinking about, especially when talking about a major injury. Um, and then also too, like the ability, or I should say, the inability to perform the required like action of that sport. So whether it be running or cycling or whatever, right? If I landed and really smoked my knee and I had, all of a sudden, a stress fracture, tibial plateau fracture or something like that, right? Like I'm unable to pedal, that would be something where you should definitely pull the plug as well. Or, if you're literally not able to run, that's probably a good indication um, of like not doing that race. I don't know if there's other things that you can think of, Will, that'd be like a major injury or like in that category, like that you would put.
Not Not really. I almost think when you're trying to make the decision of whether to pull the plug on it, if it's a major injury, it's kind of an easy decision because it's almost like you just can't do it. You have a fracture or a hamstring tear. It's like you can't even walk or move around normally. Like, how are you going to race? That's a pretty easy decision to make. I think almost the decision that you had to make, which I'd say that you're definitely not in the major injury category, like you said, but it's
Yeah, not.
almost a little bit harder to make it when it's a gray area. You know what I mean? Where it's like, I mean, we could do it, we could go through it, but like, what are the implications of that? And so I think that minor injury to medium grade injury is a little bit harder to navigate for athletes because there's a lot of factors with that.
Yeah,
I
and
think kind of tailing off of that, yeah,
go
I
ahead.
think
Go
tailing
ahead,
off of
Will.
that is like if yeah, if you're looking at like minor injuries, they're still minor injuries that can impact your ability to perform the required action. Like you're in that boat, right? Like you couldn't break. Or if you think of like people who may be dealing with, I'd say like maybe an Achilles tendinopathy that's semi-reactive, like you feel it when you walk long distances. That person shouldn't be running, right? It's still a minor injury, relatively speaking, but like they could maybe do it, but they can't do it at the level that they want to or the distance that they need to, right? So those minor injuries can still impact your ability to perform the required actions of the event. So in those cases, like if you can't, I kind of look at things like on a intensity spectrum, right? So like if you're having an issue with a lower extremity issue, a lower extremity injury, walking, just ambulating in your day to day, you're not going to be able to handle the load of a race, even if you feel like you're going to take it easy. Like you're not going to. So in that case, I would say that you have the inability to perform the action. You probably shouldn't race.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm sure I drove my wife absolutely nuts because I was so on the fence with this about whether I should race or shouldn't race or should race or shouldn't race, right? And I kept going back and forth. And, we were lucky enough where, it's only 2.5 hours away. And so, if we really wanted to, we could leave our house at the butt crack of dawn and still make it there and then drive home that night, right? So, like, much different circumstance versus like if you're traveling on a plane and you're going to a race and stuff like that. I
Sure.
think that's something also to mention is, financially like invested and the amount that you're financially invested sometimes into races. Like I know Ironman races and like some of those triathlons are like $1,000, like just for the entry fee, and you don't get that back. You got to eat that. Um, you know, that should never be
I look at people.
a deciding factor. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be a deciding factor. And I was gonna like add into that. Like I've see always like the 6 weeks leading into Boston, I have people that influx into my clinic and they're like, man, like this thing is finally too much for me to train through. I've got Boston in 6 weeks and I'm going. Like it's not a question.
Yeah.
Like they're going, and
Yes.
so like okay, we're gonna do what we can at 6 weeks, but which is generally enough time. But sometimes it's a lot closer. But to get to the point of like, yeah, man, like some of these things they're bucket list events and like this is your year to do it and something happened and like that sucks. But if it's going to compromise your overall health and your ability to train the rest of the year, in my opinion, as mad as I would be about that, like it's a no-brainer. Like you're not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
think it's easier
that
for us
kind
to
of
say. I think it's
go
easier
ahead,
for
Will.
us to say, being that we see the implications when people race through an injury, and then we can see how just that one event really prolonged the healing process and the recovery process now. And that's not always the case, but we've seen it enough to know that if we were in that boat, that we wouldn't do it, and we know enough to advise clients against it. But I think when you're in the client's shoes, it's hard to have that outside, or they don't have the outside perspective of seeing how this could be if they go through with the event.
Right. And I think that also too leads into, like the chance of further injury, and I know, you very,
Mhm.
alluded to it quickly, but if it's a bucket race list, yes, crap, dang it. For me, this was a B race, it wasn't, the thing that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm putting all my eggs in this basket and this is what I want to do. And, but I think the other thing worth noting too is like the chance of further injury, right? Like you said, okay, if you go and say,
Hmm.
you do that bucket list, right? And now all of a sudden, you further injure yourself, or, I've even had people where they've injured themselves, or they've gone to a race, done a race, full well knowing that they will continue to injure themselves and need surgery afterwards. And stuff like that. You're just like, yo, like what? Like, you got to be
Yeah.
able to see,
You
the
can't.
forest through the trees. And sometimes that's very challenging to do, especially if it's a singular focus and you've been working on that for so long. But I think that's also too, everyone has a different line, especially for minor injuries.
Mhm.
When is the risk of injury or risk of further injury worth doing that race or doing that medal? You know what I mean? Like getting that medal. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. I try to ask my patients kind of open-ended questions when it comes to this, and when they're borderline on it, and I kind of want them to come to the realization that maybe it's not a good idea, because I think it's more powerful for them to say it versus me. um,
yeah,
and I'd intervene
100%.
if they were going to do something dangerous, but a lot of times I'll paint the picture of like, okay, well, we've got this marathon coming up. This hamstring's hurting you. Like, what other events do you have going on this year? And you're like, oh, I've got the Rock and Roll Marathon in December. Like, that's the one I really like. That's the one I really want to do well for. This half marathon is a little tune-up race, and I'm like, okay, so like, how important is this race to you? And then they start to realize like, okay, like I know that there's a bigger picture in mind, and like I'm not going to let the smaller B race or C race tune-up race compromise what the big picture goal is, or compromise the rehab process that they're going through with us. So I think it's powerful to walk athletes through like their whole calendar year, and like allow them to verbalize what their goals are, because then I think it helps them to realign with what is at hand, right? And so it's like doesn't feel like a big deal to pull out of a race all of a sudden, um, because you're still can focus on the bigger picture goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think sometimes too, um, and I know, I could start to feel it even, and it wasn't even like, it wasn't my A race, it wasn't my big thing, but like you, and also too, if you've been training for this race for so long and had it as an A race, this really is like amped up a lot. But also too, it's mentally draining, right? To like deal with an injury for
Yeah.
a long period of time and trying to get over that injury for 6 weeks leading up to Boston or leading up to, Kona. Like that's super frustrating and it's mentally very draining, to be able to. Somebody's at the door, man. Um,
I'm sorry. Sorry about the dogs.
it's all good. Uh,
First time.
yeah, first time. It was bound and determined to happen eventually. But no, I
Yeah.
think athletes
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
become mentally drained, when if they're dealing with an injury for a long period of time, and um, if they're trying to get over that injury, that like mental fatigue can really drain them, like leading into a race. And I think sometimes you know people do that and then that leads to them getting super stressed out, right? And so they have this increased stress leading into the race from the injury. Man, I was so looking forward to this. I've trained so hard for this race. Like, I just want to do well. Like, I'm super stressed. I'm not sure if I can finish now, and I want to be able to compete and this and that. And I think sometimes that also, too, can be reasons to not race, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. I know that sounds totally
Yeah.
counter like to what we normally think as endurance athletes, but I think it's worth noting that that is something that like definitely plays a role on it. I know that I've felt stress leading into races to be able to perform and stuff like that, especially swimming in college. My God, like the amount of stress that you feel, going into conference or going into conference swim meet or going into NCAAs is a lot. Especially if you have teammates that are relying on you. They're your teammates. You know that they're going to be there for you whether you do well or not, and they're still going to have your back, and love you all the same, but like, you still feel that increased stress, and all of a sudden, you either perform and that race is done or whatever, and you're like, you can kind of feel like that, sense of relief. But also too, I went back and forth probably about 10 times, and I know my wife was just like, you just need to make a decision and move forward for this race. And I was going back and forth, and I was definitely working myself up, in terms of like stress. And finally I was just like, on Friday afternoon, I'm just at like 2 p.m. Keep in mind, the race starts Saturday at like 8 a.m. So really close leading up to it, but I'm just like, I'm just not gonna race. Like, I don't think it's the right decision. I'm gonna be a chance of injury and that, all that stuff. And when I finally did that, I was like, okay, all right, made my
Yeah.
decision. It sucks, but like, I feel better. Let's focus on getting this elbow better so I can continue to go back and train. And you definitely feel like a little bit of stress relief when you finally make a decision, whether it is to race or to not race. But I think that's like worth mentioning, and it's not something people in the endurance community like to talk about, because it's a sport where it's who can do the most suffering, right? And like, that's kind of built in within the culture. Who can do the most suffering? Can you suffer through injury? Yeah, they push through injury and this and that. And it's one thing if you're a professional athlete, right, who's getting paid to do it.
Yeah. I was about to say that.
I'm far from, man. I'm far from. The closest thing I get to professional
Yeah.
athletes is treating them, and and that's
Yeah.
about it. And so, I don't get paid to do this. My income is not tied to me performing at the Whiskey 50 or at another race. And I think that's something that is also like worth noting, is like, hey, I'm the first one to tell you I'm willing to suffer just as much as anyone else. But also too, like, I'm smart enough now, at least, or I think I'm smart enough now. Maybe my wife is just smart enough now than she tells me, but where I feel like I'm smart enough to make decisions for like long term, rather than short term.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I think you have enough perspective as an endurance athlete to know that you're gonna live to fight another day versus, let risk anything worse happening because of this, because of the event, right? And so you just have better perspective, and I think that comes with experience of racing. But it sucks to be in that position to try to make the call, because everyone has so much pride, like you said, in suffering, and you feel like you're quitting when you don't even show up. But honestly, like,
Oh,
that's so
100%.
much more respect, in my opinion, when I see athletes that go out there knowing that they're hurt, knowing that this is a bad idea. Like, I just look at that like, dude, you're just being irresponsible. Like, if something happens to you, like, I don't want anything worse to happen to you, but you're making like a bad decision for your overall health. And so that, to me, there's no amount of pride in that, to me. But everyone's different. So I have much more respect for someone who can see the bigger picture and say, yeah, I'm not gonna suffer through this. I'm not going to risk further injury. I'm going to keep my eyes on the prize and live to fight another day. So, but that being said, like, I get it, man. It's hard. It's hard to make the decision.
And
I had
I
that
feel
once.
like
I think.
too.
I mean, I've
Go ahead.
definitely not showed up for. I was gonna say. I think there was. I can think of one cyclocross season where there was a race, and this was living in Louisiana, and there was one of the races in the series was in Jackson, Mississippi, and had really good standings that year, and that, I think the week leading into that race, like on the Tuesday, race was on Saturday and Sunday. On like a Tuesday, I think I had like a stomach bug that kind of wiped me out for Tuesday, Wednesday, and like Thursday, Friday. Like, I just wasn't able to like eat, and I was on the bike, but like, I just wasn't able to. I just didn't feel good. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't feel right. And so we still went to Jackson. I still brought my bike, and because I was like, man, maybe you're gonna like perk up Friday night. But I had already talked with Michelle. I was like, man, like, if I'm just not feeling like myself, I think I was kind of mentally drained too. This was like towards the end of the season. And I was like, I think like I might just sit this one out, and we can just like have a nice weekend um, away. And that's what we ended up doing. Like, we went to Jackson. I had everything. And by Friday night, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to race. And so we just had a nice weekend. And I do not regret that decision at all.
Yeah, I think two things pop into my head. One also too is, on some of those descents, like if I'm not able to brake and I run into somebody and cause them injury, dude, I would feel awful. Absolutely awful. Or, I have,
Yeah, that's a good point.
just one
Yeah.
little quick lapse of focus, because I'm focusing on forearm or knee or whatever it was, right? And one quick lapse of focus, and all of a sudden, you take out somebody else's wheel, and they get injured. Like, that's not worth it to me either. I'm not racing at the pointy end of the race. That's not great.
Yep.
You also mentioned this was actually the first race that I pre-signed up for and not gone to and not performed. So this is actually my first race of not being able to race. I've had races where I had intentions of racing, but it was same day sign up, like a local XC race or whatever. And I ended up just being like, no, I'm not feeling it today. I'm just not going to do it. But that's much different though than I signed up for the Whiskey 50 4 months ago, and have been preparing for it and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that I had over the weekend was FOMO, some serious FOMO, because I know what's at that race and I know like how much fun it is.
Yeah.
And, it was, last time I did the race, we went to this like taco shop right on Main Street, and it was awesome. And, you got, some tacos and a marg, and it was great. And, you'd watch the rest of the finishers kind of, slowly trickle in. And then, you wake up the next morning and, they have, another little small race, and it's like a whole bunch of fun. And, the vibe in the city, and, there's so many people there, everyone's cyclists, and, you see them bikes everywhere, and it's just a different vibe than normal. And like, I had a lot of FOMO, man. I had a lot of FOMO. I was borderline just being like, I was borderline, I made myself do something else. I made myself, busy that weekend, or else I know I would just be going stir crazy, not racing, and it's still being super close. So yeah, I think that's another thing too that comes with it, is sometimes, you get that like fear of missing out and like wanting to be there. But that also too is, I think, it's a exercise in patience and like,
mm-hmm.
and probably being smarter and seeing the bigger picture. As much as I hate saying that, because I'm such a competitor, I'm competitive at everything that I do, and I think it drives my wife a little nuts sometimes. But
well, I think it can, like, on that note, like, it can also make you hungrier next year, like more like you really want to do well next year. And so you're kind of carry a little bit of extra motivation, a little bit of extra intensity going into the training when you think about it the next year. And so I think that it can kind of be a good fuel if used properly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts, Will, on like when to pull the plug on racing, either major injury, minor injury, or anything else that like pops into mind when you?
No, not really. I think the listeners just need to keep the big picture in mind. That's usually what I tell people. What's your big picture when you're trying to make this decision? And if racing in an event through an injury compromises the big picture, then you should think twice about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate you guys. If you wouldn't mind, like, subscribe, leave a little review on whatever platform you listen to. Also too, if you guys have suggestions for topics, we are always open to suggestions. So please comment or send us a message about any sort of topics that you guys would love to hear about. I know best way to contact me is through Instagram. My Instagram is The Endurance Physio. The and Endurance both have an E, so there's 2 E's in there. So it's The Endurance Physio. Will, where's the best place?
Yeah, you can contact me at my personal Instagram. That's at Will Gonzaba. And you can check out my company Instagram. That's at Almost Park Physio. That's OLMOSPARKPHYSIO. Had a little brain fart there. My mind.
Yeah, a little glitch. You glitched. The Matrix glitched. little glitch in the matrix. Awesome. Well, thank you
Yeah,
guys for listening.
yeah.
We look forward to to seeing you guys again next week. And if you can, really help us out, share it with a friend. We'd love to get this out to more people.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Sorry.